Oh, hey out there. You are listening to Tiny Little Victories podcast, and I am your host, Jennifer Kite-Powell. This is very exciting because this is the last episode of season 3. Whoop, whoop. End of season 3 just means that there's a beginning to season 4. Our guest today is a celebrity. To me, he's a celebrity. He is the host of the Food Fight podcast. Food Fight! It's not that kind of food fight. Matt has been hosting for several years now the Food Fight podcast, which is sponsored by the EIT Food, which is co-funded by the European Union. Yeah, the whole European Union. And before you're like, oh no, this sounds like something I'm not going to want to listen to, just stop right there. First of all, very good looking guy, which you won't be able to see because this is audio. Secondly, a very interesting guy who is super passionate about exploring the challenges facing our global food system. That is a thing. And the trends around those food systems, food technology, and the entrepreneurs transforming the future of food. Now, if you don't think that our food needs to be transformed, then maybe you should just not listen anymore. But it does, because here's the one thing we all have in common. I've said it before. I'll say it again. We all eat food. Growing food is becoming harder and harder because of climate change, because areas that are growing our food are getting hotter and hotter, because other places we're growing our food are getting wetter and wetter, and that is causing a real problem. Our soil is absolutely awful. We have a water scarcity problem. So these are real things. So if you're thinking this only shows up on NPR, you're wrong. It should be showing up everywhere, and we should all be listening. By the way, it's one of my favorite podcasts, next to Ali Ward's Ologies. What does that say? It's that good. So some of the topics that show up in the Food Fight podcast come everywhere from like crafting a chocolate revolution, sustainability, ethics, and flavor in the chocolate industry. That was a very interesting episode. Catalyzing climate action, unveiling the secrets of a food futurist, how to transform school gardens, decoding food product sustainability. Everybody really wants to have and buy sustainable food products, but what does that really mean? And are you actually doing it? Because I'm just going to say this, folks. If you're not growing your food or buying your food from a local farmer's market, you are part of the problem. And you are importing your food, something to think about. And so where is that food being imported from? How is that food being grown? What are they struggling with to grow that food for you? So this podcast covers a whole lot of episodes that should be prime time, 100%. So let's make them all prime time together. Let's care about what our food comes from. So with no further ado, I'm going to bring you the host of the Food Fight podcast, Matt Eastland, who also is a crazy pizza fanatic and has traveled around the world to find the best tasting pizza. And he has discovered it. He's going to tell you where it is. It's not where you think it is. And he also has perfected his own secret pizza dough recipe, which he's agreed to share with us. So you got to stick around to the end of the episode so you can get that recipe, right? Next up, Matt Eastland. So, hey, Matt Eastland, welcome to Tiny Little Victories. Finally, hey. We've got you.
Yeah, what a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on this show. I'm super stoked, and apologies. It's taken a while to get here, but I'm really glad to be here.
Well, you know what, Matt? This is what happens when you're such a famous podcast host. It's true. So everybody is listening. Matt is the host of the Food Fight podcast. Could there not be a cooler name on the planet for a podcast? I'm not sure.
I did get in there early before everybody else.
Yeah, you did. Did you come up with that name?
I did come up with that name, yeah.
What? It's like so like a fist in the air. It's so like in your face. I almost feel like John Belushi's going to be there in the background, like screaming food fight. But what drove you to that podcast name?
We were trying to come up with a name that really represented, well, what we were trying to achieve, right? So that it's not meant to be like divisive. It's meant to be the reverse. So we realized that there were whole lots of people out there who were fighting for a better food system. And then we kind of thought, all fighting, and then obviously put the food together, and we thought, well, food fight, obviously it's a phrase and all those sorts of things. So it just fitted really, really nicely. But with the idea is, you know, we were always trying to explore, we say on the show, the greatest challenges that are facing the food system. and the innovators and entrepreneurs looking to solve it. So it's meant to be something where we get people together. And sometimes they have different opinions. Sometimes actually they really agree with each other, but it's all about that conversation.
I like that because I do think that, I mean, it is actually a food fight. If you think about it, if you think about like how many crop cycles we have left and, you know, how we've really trashed the planet in terms of how we're growing food, how, you know, it's getting hotter in places that grow our food. So I think food fight really does fit. And maybe we do have to raise up in a way. And like this podcast is about conversation, which is one of the reasons I love about it. But did you always want to do a podcast? Because you have another job.
I did always want to do a podcast.
Oh, you did?
I've been listening to podcasts like right from the word go, and I just always thought it's an amazing medium. It's very weird in the sense that, you know, if you imagine that you could talk to 20,000 people in one room and they would listen to you for an hour, I mean, that is amazing. But if you've got something worthwhile saying, and that's, you know, that's effectively, you know, some people start, I mean, I'm at, 20,000 listeners, but I mean, there's people who are like gathering millions.
I think 20,000 is huge. And if I had a clapping sound, I would add it in right now.
But what I'm saying is there's so many more, like you can reach so many people with really good messages. So I've always wanted to do it because I thought it was a great thing to do. I also realized that through my job, which I'll talk about, that actually putting the right people together was a great way to have that conversation, find solutions and make something really positive. Because sometimes when we're talking about food systems, it can be quite negative.
Yeah.
But then my day job, I'm the director of brand and digital for EIT Food. So for anyone who hasn't heard of EIT Food, we're the world's largest food innovation community, and we're all on a mission as a community together to make the food system healthy, more sustainable, and resilient. That's the overall goal.
I really love that. And I love that you're talking about that. It is my passion, what you're talking about as a person, a human, actually someone that eats food. I do think that we need more things like this. And I lived in Europe for so long. And I guess I see that it's part of like the European Union. And I really feel like you guys just get it, right? I mean, you know, you're a smaller community, like space-wise as it goes, you know, like you have limited resources. And I think you make much more of an impact, I think, over there than we actually do here. We won't even talk about what a hot mess it is over here. I love that. And that's how I found you actually when I was listening, because I was just looking for interesting shows about sustainability, activism, you know, climate change, food. And I was like, wait, what? EIT Food/Food Fight podcast? I'm in. So when you started that job, did you think I'm doing a podcast, or did you gradually like shift into that?
I think it grew a bit because, I mean, when we started, I mean, this because I've been at EIT Food now for over 6 years, and we're a relatively, you know, I could still sometimes still refer to ourselves as a startup. So when we started, there was about 10 of us, and we've kind of grown arms and legs from there. You know, there's over 200 of us now.
What? In 6 years?
Yeah. So,
that's amazing.
We're funded by the EU, so that obviously helps.
Yeah.
But we were just trying to produce great content around the projects that we were delivering as an organization.
Okay.
And we had, you know, very limited resources, very limited channels. And I think by about 2020, I kind of came up with the idea with the team to, this podcast stuff looks fun. Let's see if we can give it a go. I didn't realize, by the way, how intensive and, you know, hard starting a podcast is.
I am so glad you're saying that, because people don't get it. Like, it is hard.
It's a commitment. Yeah. But it's a joy as well, because you just get to speak to the best people, obviously.
I love that. I was just on this trip to Scotland recently, and I had a podcast that was due out like when I was there, but you do it all to get it done ahead of time, because it's like these commitment to people that you talk to. For me, this is about telling stories, and you're also telling stories. And while I was there, though, I just kept running into the most interesting people. 2 authors, Andy the Highlander. He's like coming at you with full Scottish garb, just like, Andy, here's a microphone. And like weavers, and a magical guy that drives a taxi too fast, like dodging sheep. And they all agreed to be on the show. They're like, yeah, sure, fine, we'll do it. So your point about like the passion, I think, is so true. And I don't think people understand, like, the people, like, you have a whole team of producers behind you. So did you put that team together originally when you started, or were you just like, let's make a podcast?
I didn't really know the first thing about starting a podcast. It's actually quite an interesting story. So I'd been to an event, I think it was talking about like the principles of being a great leader, right? And it was I was in another job, and there was two women who were presenting the whole thing. I found them really inspiring, and I contacted them afterwards, and I was saying if there's any way we can link up or anything, and she'd actually said to me, "Oh, do you realize that we host a podcast?" And I said, "No, I didn't know that." And they directed me to this podcast, which at this time was called, I think it was called Amazing If. And as it turns out, Amazing If then grew into the Squiggly Careers podcast, which is one of the biggest global podcasts now.
I know that podcast.
Yeah. What they're doing is they talk about like all of the things which aren't spoken about, I think, in careers, and the pressure and all those incredible things.
It's very, very, everybody's going to love that because most everybody has a job, even if you work for yourself or you work for somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah, they really found their audience. And I just got in contact and I said, "Do you know a good agency?" And they put me in contact with our producers, Pixie, in London. And
they're great.
Yeah, we've been with you ever since. So it was very fortuitous, let's say it like that. Or what's the word? Kismet.
Kismet, happenstance, fortuitous.
All of that.
Serendipity. We can use all those words. I actually think that when things are meant to happen, they happen. Like when you put the energy out there, it comes back to you, and then everything's just like snap, crackle, pop. Because I think of a number of people I know tried to start podcasts. I thought they had better ideas than I had. But also, you have to have the tenacity to do it. You have to be willing to put in the legwork. You got to go back and re-record. And I want to ask you about that later. But I have a friend who's the managing editor at the Den of Geek in New York. And he loves baseball, like a baseball junkie, addict, probably needs help for this. And so he ran into these two fellas who like had an app about baseball commentary and just like, maybe like the career thing, like all the things you talk about baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a podcast that they were making in their basement, but it had like 500,000, 600,000, 700,000, like just so many, but they were really struggling to get like their app going along with it. So the Den of Geek like invested in this, and how this thing is just like skyrocketed. Wow. Well, this kid's like happier than he could ever be because baseball, like, and he got to like help these two guys really elevate this. And I've watched them. They're on TikTok, they're doing all that stuff. And he says he was shocked at how much work it was. And he's just doing like a smidgen of the work. So
yeah, I think it should really be a full-time thing, but obviously I've got two hats on. But like you say, Jennifer, if you've got the passion for it and you just 100%. Love talking to the coolest, most amazing people, it brings you through. I always come off these things super energized.
I do too. I feel the same way. Like in the morning, you're like, oh no. And then you're like, ah. So, we're going to ask you this. Like, okay, you have a lot of guests. You're in season 5, right?
Coming season 6, coming into
season 6. I listened to your best of. It was great. You do this great thing where you talk a little bit and then you come back and play these clips. It's effing amazing. It's like I'm tuning in all the time because you're giving me a story. You're not making me work as a listener. I love that. So out of all of these guests that you've talked to over the past 5 years, which ones stand out for you the most? And like, yeah, you knew that was coming though, right?
I knew it was coming, yeah. It's funny. I always get asked this, and because, we're coming up to 150 episodes now, and I think I've probably, over that time, we've interviewed over 200 entrepreneurs. So it is really hard to do, but if I have to.
You do. When actually you don't. You can do whatever you want.
Well, if I position it as the ones which I've learned the most from or have kind of surprised or shocked me the most, that's kind of the way I frame it.
I like that.
So going all the way back, so can I briefly talk about 5? Can I have 5?
It's your podcast. You can have 29. Take it. Go.
All right. So going all the way back to the start of season 1, there was an episode, I think it was episode 7, where we talk about can we really influence consumers to make healthier food choices. And we had on that show a chef and a food activist from Brazil called Bella Gill. And she said something on that podcast which has stuck with me forever, and I'll never forget it. She said at the time that people are most motivated to change their diet in 2 key moments in their life. So when you become a parent or when you get sick.
Wow.
Right? And this is one of those things that stayed with me because I've never heard anyone who's cut through all of that so easily. And of course, what that means is that you've got those two key moments there when you can really make a difference to somebody's health and the choices that they make. And I became a dad for the first time this year, and that thing about becoming a parent is so true, because, you suddenly you realize it's not just your focus that you can eat as much rubbish as you want, but actually you're raising a human. You're raising a human, right? So
no more ring dings for you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it also kind of shows that there are two interventions there where, as doctors, for example, when you're super sick, that's when the moment where a doctor could really make a difference to your health. Unfortunately, they don't tend to have a great nutrition training, things like that. But so that really stuck with me as almost like a principle, which I really liked. Then we had a food historian on episode 28, Annie Gray.
I love those guys. Yeah.
And also, you would love her, Jennifer. She was just so off the wall. I think we had to sort of
send her to me. Yeah.
A lot of what she was saying, because she was very vocal.
Yeah, that's my kind of person. Yeah.
You'd love her. She was really great. And we were talking about things, some sort of food waste and, all the kind of how things have changed since the past and what we can learn. And she had this story about, she did these these not a festival exactly, but she'd go and dress up in Victorian garb. I think it was in Great Yarmouth in the UK, which is one of the most deprived towns in the UK. And she was sat there, and it was this whole Victorian thing, and she was plucking a pheasant, right? And she said a little boy came up to her and said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, it's a pheasant." And kid looked at her and she said, "Well, it's a bit like a chicken." And apparently this child, I think he's sort of about 7 years old, looked at her in absolute disgust and said, "That's not a chicken, because chickens don't have feathers." And it was a moment like that which really made me realize how disconnected a lot of us are from our food, where our food comes from, because a lot of people, they don't even see where it comes from. And I imagine for that child, it's like chicken comes from a packet.
From a nugget, yeah.
And a nugget, exactly. So it was a shock. And I think it was that moment I realized that, how much work there is still to be done. So, big thanks to Annie on that one.
Yeah. Food historians are so interesting because, like you said, they take you back to the connection. Most of the food we eat now didn't even exist then. And then you see Hollywood or other movies having these big feasts with Henry VIII. It's there's no way they ate that. That food wasn't even around. And coffee didn't even come on the scene until the late 1600s in the UK. It's
and also, I mean, okay, Henry VIII aside, but one of the things that, food loss and waste, which actually is one of the other episodes that really kind of stuck out for me. Food loss and waste just wasn't a thing. You go back to Victorian times, you don't waste food because it's too valuable, right? You reuse, you change a piece of chicken into a loaf, you change it into puddings, you put it in soups, you boil the bones, nothing is wasted. And I think that's also something that we've lost as a society now. And actually, that's one of the other episodes, again, which something stuck out for me. It was episode 77. We had WWF on, the World Wildlife Fund, and Oddbox. They're a UK company who supply fruit and veg, which is otherwise going to be wasted. They kind of package it up and they send it out to people.
I love that.
Their CEO, Emily Van Popperengi, at the time, she'd said to me that food waste is the invisible monster driving climate change. And it was another one of those kind of sit back and listen moments, because, everyone's saying, okay, well, actually food loss and waste, it's about 30% of our food is wasted. And you imagine all the resources that go into creating it, all the water, all the energy. It's a tragedy, really. And it's driving climate change.
Yeah, it really is.
But it's actually bigger than I thought. They were saying it's more like 40% of our food is lost or wasted, which is shocking.
I read an article recently in The Guardian that actually looked at that, and it was talking about heatflation and how it's affecting how farmers are growing. But the waste, I can barely go into a grocery store today and see avocados stacked up, because I learned how much water it takes to grow 85 gallons for one avocado. You shouldn't be eating avocados. And then you go into the store and you see piles and piles of tomatoes. And I asked a gentleman once for Forbes, I said, why can't grocery stores say, oh, look, we don't need this many tomatoes. And he said, they don't want anybody walking into a grocery store and not seeing food. I'm like, but it's so wasteful. It takes 24 hours to get a tomato up from Mexico to the US, and they just sit there. It's gross. I just have to say it's gross. I choose to buy, since I moved back to the States, I do a farm share from an organic farm about 120 miles from here. And when that food is up, there's no more food. And she's like, not enough rain this season. Sorry, no tomatoes. Bye.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
I am too. And I think that's something which I've really seen change as well over what I've been speaking to people, is that kind of disruption of that model where you have this massive food supply chain, retailers hold a lot of the power.
So silly.
And the food that you get, you've got no transparency over it. That model is being disrupted. I mean, we had Pete on the show on Ubi recently, who's worked out, he spent 10 years working on a platform where small local farmers are able to ship everything that they can produce direct to consumers. So he does all the logistics, all of the packaging, everything is done. So all you have to focus on as a farmer is growing the great food. And then it goes to the consumer and they get paid a fair price and all those things. So yeah, that model.
We have to change our model. Like, we can't keep doing what we've been doing. Otherwise, like, that's why I think this show and your voice is so important, because especially today, it's American Thanksgiving. And I've talked to so many people that are like, I have to go make this pie. I have to go do this. I'm like, you don't have to do that. Like, we don't have to keep doing. You see all these chefs today talk about like tail to snout, snout to tail cooking. Yeah. That's not new, guys. We used to do it. Like you said, I grew up in the deep South, and my grandfather would, get a cow, and we were little. We didn't understand why this cow was always young. Why is this cow always the same cow every time? But, grew up then understanding this, like every single thing he used. And you're right. People aren't making those connections, which is why I think this show is so important. Now that you have children, did you ever think about maybe doing, kind of like Allie Ward does with Ologies? She has Smologies, where she takes her shows and she makes smaller episodes for kids, because of course kids need to also be connected to the environment. And I think you have a child now. Like, what is it that you want to pass along to your offspring in terms of like food?
Yeah.
And eating and growing food.
Yeah.
It's heavy, isn't it?
It is. I mean, also, I compare it to, bless my parents. I mean, I was a child of the 80s. So, I mean, what I want to pass on is nothing that I was given, basically.
Yeah, you're like, give me that chicken nugget. Yeah.
Yeah, it was all ultra processed. It was convenient. It was super packaged. It was brightly colored.
It was pretty.
It was pretty and it was tasty. Yeah. And you just wanted as much of it as possible.
Salty.
And your parents were like, brilliant. We've been told this is great.
Back.
Yeah, so I'm not going to pass that along, basically. So, I mean, for me, what I want to pass along is that value of food piece.
I like that.
And the value of your choices in food. So, funnily enough, I was in front of a whole load of students last week and I got asked a similar sort of question. And I'd really, really like our focus to go back to learning how to cook and learning how to grow food. I mean, there's loads that I've learned over the podcast, but I think the foundational piece about the value of food is so important. When I was growing up, okay, yes, child of the 80s, but at least at school, I was taught the basics. So we had this, home economics, right? Where you would learn to bake bread and puddings and, you can construct a salad and, just the basics. But that's lost. I mean, it's missing. And I think if you know how to cook, you can see, you can feel, you can taste, you can touch your food.
Absolutely. That's so beautiful.
And you can put it together. It's like a wonderful chemistry thing.
It really is.
And it connects you to it. But if you layer on top of that, okay, not only have you cooked your own food, but the food that you're cooking with, you've grown it yourself, it changes your mindset entirely because everything tastes better. Right? So you want local and you don't waste a thing. And, that whole cultural thing about, being around food as a family and all of that. Yeah, it's vital. I was saying to my partner the other day, I was saying, like, I can't wait for I can just sit in front of our daughter with a cookbook and read her like it's a story. I'd love to do that.
You know what? I really love that you're saying that because I was not a child of the 80s and I grew up with a mother who was really into like goat's milk and sheep's milk. She made our own yogurt in a little machine you plugged in. So I grew up with a slightly different understanding of food. I had my first cookbook when I was 7. It was like just a cookbook for kids.
Right.
And we'd go in there and we cook. And I think that's why I love cooking. But also to your great point about people learning how to cook and growing food, I grow a lot of things in my urban garden here. And the point about waste, whew, if I lose an eggplant, a Japanese eggplant, because I left it in the oven too long, I almost cry.
100%. You care. You really deeply care.
You deeply care. I pulled potatoes out of the ground this year and I was like watching them on the countertop. You better eat those. You better eat those. I can't pull asparagus, cut asparagus fast enough because if it gets past 10 inches, you're supposed to leave it. So I just walked around in my garden, like shoving it in my mouth because it pained me to like watch it. And I think if more people could have that experience, then you begin, like you said, to put the value to food. And like, how do we get there? Like, how do we get back there? Because you can grow food in your windowsill in New York. I did when I lived there on my fire escape.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, like I say, there's probably kind of key moments and key people who can influence your life. And, you know, back to Bella Gills, I think as a parent, it needs to be more of your responsibility. And I appreciate that can be really, really hard because if you don't have the education about it in the first place, that obviously you're not going to be able to pass that on to your kids. So
that's so true.
There's a general population education piece here. I think teachers, you know, have a really important role to play with kids, you know, when they're growing up to make sure that they understand the importance of food, why it needs to be grown sustainably, why you don't throw things away, you know, why just because it's ultra tasty doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you, but you can create ultra tasty food, which is healthy, of course.
Of course.
And doctors and I think everyone at that early stage has a role to play.
I agree.
And you know, on that, we had Dr. Federica Amati on the show really recently so she's the head nutritionist of Zoe, and she was making some amazing points around like lifelong health about the fact that actually the path of your nutrition starts actually pre-conception. It's like even when you're trying for a baby, the foods that you're eating there can have an impact on how your baby is, you know, sort of born and the, you know, the microbiome. And like the first 1,000 days of a child's life are so important. And she was making similar points around, you know, yes, you've got to expose them to lots of different foods. It shouldn't all just be mushed up. You know, kids have got to know what food looks like to understand it.
Absolutely. I want to listen to that. That sounds fascinating because I do think you can see the difference between people around me when they're like, I'm just chopping up this avocado, you know, or they're making their own baby food because they wanted to create the best nutrition for their child. And that's definitely an economic divide, you know, a socioeconomic divide. And then if it's cheaper to go to McDonald's and get the whole family, you know, dinner for $10, if it's gross.
And I get it. I totally get it. I mean, the thing is, where I've kind of grown from, you know, my experience, I now get to see both sides, right? Because when I was a kid, I was actually pretty obese. You know, by today's standards, I was obese. And again, there's no blame there. It was just the kind of, it was the way it was at the time.
It was the 80s.
yeah, exactly. And I've kind of been on my own journey, and now, you know, health and, you know, fitness is very important to me. So I really get to see both sides about how hard it can be to be healthy, but I also know why it's so important to be healthy. And, you know, you get into the policy of these sorts of things. I think like I was reading a stat like in the UK that unhealthy foods are like twice as cheap as healthy foods. You know, what hope do we have?
Same here. Same. We have no hope. None. And I think Jamie Oliver tried, you know, and say what you want about Jamie Oliver, but he had children and then became very focused on children being involved in food. And I think he really pushed for you guys over there, like keeping the school lunches.
Yep.
These school lunches over here are frightening. The fact that kids can go and put money in and get Cheetos out of a machine, like, also, I get mad on planes, actually. How hard is it to bring a bowl of fruit around? How hard is that to bring a bowl of apples?
I know, it's ultra processed, ultra salty.
I'll take an apple any day over. On my flight back, I was like shoving apples in my mouth because when you land back, you can't bring all that fruit in. And the flight attendant coming by, she goes, well, take this. I'm still eating it. We haven't landed. Not wasting these apples.
I know. Yeah, there's something in there around convenience as well. But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, we're lazy. We're lazy AF. So listen, we got to get to your little fetish before this podcast ends, which is a pizza.
Yeah.
So you are a well-known, your publicist sent me a little bio on you, and she's like, this guy's crazy about pizza. You love pizza, and you're on a mission to find the best pizza. So what have you discovered? And why pizza?
It's got to be a childhood thing, right? It's come from a childhood thing,
Yeah.
but I think there's something beautifully simple about pizza in that you can take a base, you put some tomato on it, and then you can have whatever you want. So ultimately, it's because I'm greedy, right? I just love the fact, the variation. Yeah, I just love the fact that you can have whatever you want. It can be as bland as you want or as exciting as you want. So I think it's kind of a childhood thing which has grown into this understanding that, yeah, you can make incredible things with it.
Are you making pizza at home?
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah. Pizza at home. I've got, there's a brand called Uni. I've got the pizza oven, yeah, all of that. So it's all happening.
This is some serious stuff.
Yeah. And what I've discovered is, generally speaking, I'm sorry to say, but there's a lot of the pizza that you can buy out there in restaurants is terrible, super bland.
Absolutely.
And they say it's all artisanal. It's not. A lot of it's mass produced.
Yeah.
One thing I've discovered is that I will travel a very long distance to get the best possible pizza. So, I mean, I was driving through France so I'm big into my wine as well, through a wine tour.
Those go together, wine and pizza.
Exactly. And we came across this tiny little place in the village of Gourd, which is in the south of France. And I swear to God, hands down, the best pizza I've ever had in my whole life. I mean, people were literally queuing out the door, but it was French, but the guy was authentically Italian. And then I forced my girlfriend at the time to come back the next day because it was just that good.
Oh.
So we've said that we will go back there specifically to Gourd, just for that pizza.
Just to get the pizza.
Hopefully it's still there.
I think that's really beautiful because I lived in Italy for a bit and it is it's a craft. It's an artisan skill.
It is a craft. That craft is being lost though.
I think there was a podcast about pizza. I'll have to send it to you afterwards.
You should,
and it
please.
was about, they were traveling around looking for who was still making really old authentic pizza in Italy. And like you said, those little tiny places where they have the wooden stoves, that thing is putting out 900 degrees worth of heat. And there's a little lady this big, she's 102, and she's just bringing those pies in and out. That's a dying craft.
It is.
Just like pressing olive oil, olive trees, same.
Yeah, and I think the good thing that I'm hoping that's happening, and certainly what I'm seeing, is that it's dying out, but as people are realizing that the quality is getting worse, then more and more people are then just taking up the mantle again of doing it themselves. You make your own pizza bread, it's super straightforward. It's 3 ingredients, and then you put whatever you want on it and you bake it in the oven. It's dead easy.
Matt, you're going to have to give us Matt's pizza dough recipe. We're going to put it into the show notes. You have to promise us. And we want to know, what is the pizza that you make for your family, for your partner and your child? Are you making pizza at home? Are you eating it every day, every week? Come on, give us the pizza lowdown.
Okay, it's a Friday thing. We have pizza every Friday, so it's Pizza Friday. We're sort of mainly vegetarian, but we're also a little bit pescatarian, so I guess I suppose you'd have to call us flexitarian. It's mainly a veggie pizza, so margarita based.
Or we could just say sometimes you eat meat, sometimes you don't. We could also say that.
You can. Very rarely, but a little bit, yeah. So it's a variation on a veggie theme, but it's always got to have olives on there.
Okay.
Potentially capers, anything kind of super salty.
Yes, salty.
And spicy. So, throw as many chilies on there as you want to bring out the flavor. So it's all sorts of different veg, which will vary from week to week, but then we'll kind of, dial up the taste through sort of spice and salt.
And the heat, yeah.
And the heat.
I am a nutty eggplant on a pizza person.
Oh, yeah.
Because I have Japanese and white Italian Bianca eggplant out there. And I love to grill them and roast them and just lay them on my pizza and just nom, 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 nom.
So
I just
good.
love eggplant.
And it's because you've grown it yourself.
I have so many eggplant to eat right now. That's what I'll be doing today. So other than this little place in the south of France, what other places have you traveled to where you're this pizza is amazing?
Well, I mean, it would be crazy not to say Italy. So, I mean, obviously there's, Neapolitan pizzas and all of that, which are amazing. But I still think that if you really want the best possible pizzas just in general, Sicily's the place. So Sicily, it's always super
magical
rustic.
Down there.
It's always locally grown. It's always produced by, some mama out there who's just got a recipe that's been handed down from generation to generation.
Exactly. He has a hat on. He's kind of hunched over. He's got a wool jacket and it's 72 degrees.
That's right. Exactly. You've been there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've spent like 6 months in Sicily working on something. So,
really?
I fell in love with it. Yeah, it's amazing.
So, I mean, just the food in general in Sicily is amazing.
Tastes like food, Matt. Tastes like food.
It does taste like food. I actually did, me and my girlfriend, we took 7 days there and doing a gourmet tour of the north, east and south of Sicily. I have never eaten so well and put on so much weight in my life in the space of 10 days. It was insane.
But it's good weight.
It was good weight.
Because it will come off.
It was joyful weight.
It's joyful weight. And if you're going to gain weight, that's the right way to do it. Be joyful. And on that note, this is such a joyous podcast. Your time, your energy, your brain, your stories about pizza, and these 3 memorable guests. So thank you so much for coming on this show. I feel so incredibly fortunate that we snagged you.
The pleasure is all mine, Jennifer, really. I have to admit.
Thank you.
I wasn't expecting to spend as much time talking about pizza, but I'm very glad that I did.
Right? It's your thing, man. So you have to talk about it.
It's my thing.